And it was a late night in Congress last night. The Republican-controlled House voted last night to include dozens of controversial amendments to the National Defense Authorization Bill. Now, this isn't a spending bill. That comes in the fall. But this one decides how the U.S. military can spend their money. Now included at the behest of Republicans, though, measures limiting the DOD's diversity initiatives, bans on the military covering gender-affirming care, and attempts to roll back a Pentagon policy that guarantees service members support in accessing abortion care. Far-right Republicans also tried to push proposals that would limit America's involvement in Ukraine, but those failed. A full vote is expected today, but Democrats have pledged to oppose the bill because of those things, writing in a statement that Republicans have, quote, hijacked what's always been bipartisan legislation to continue, quote, jamming their right-wing ideology down the throats of the American people. And one of those Democratic lawmakers up early and joining us now, Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts. He's a member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure and the Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the U.S. and China. He's also a veteran, which is why I love that you're at this nexus of the policymaking and the NDAA itself. I mean, I'm just going to pretend that we're in the halls of Congress, because typically today the first question I would ask you is, how are you voting?
Good morning. Nice to be with you. I'm voting no. And it didn't have to be that way. I approach each of these defense budgets on its own merits and with an open mind. I come at the budget as a Marine veteran. I come at the budget as someone who worked in the private sector for 5 years. And, of course, I look to my district's priorities and values. But this defense budget misses the mark profoundly. Number one, it does not provide sufficient support to Ukrainians fighting on the front lines of the free world. And number two is it doesn't ask the Pentagon to spend smarter, not bigger. The Pentagon is the biggest bureaucracy in the entire world. It's failed every audit it's been subject to. And yet we are allowing the Pentagon to continue to do less with more instead of allowing and empowering Ukrainians to have the arms that they need. We're asking them to do more with less.
And I want to ask you about President Biden's trip to NATO. But first, I do want to sort of telegraph what this NDAA fight tells you about what could happen for this upcoming September spending battle. The thing that I had heard is that Republicans were being told, hey, put all the controversial stuff that's not exactly germane to the NDAA into the later spending fight. This should be an appropriations battle. But what does it tell you about the strategy that you watched Republicans employ now? And does it make you even more concerned about the possibility of a government shutdown come September?
Yes, it does. And it tells me that Kevin McCarthy is not doing his job as Speaker. A Speaker of the House needs to count to 218 to pass legislation, needs to stand up to extremes within his own party, and needs to stand up for the prerogatives of the House relative to the Senate and to the White House. That is the job of a Speaker of the House, a job that Speaker Pelosi did masterfully for decades. And what Kevin McCarthy is doing right now is he's allowing the tail to wag the dog. And it means that the House as a chamber is going to lose our ability to shape policy, because the Senate is going to be the one that has to craft these appropriations bills in line with the debt limit deal that Kevin McCarthy himself agreed to with President Biden. I mean, think about the message it sends to Democrats when Republicans shake hands and then turn around and renege on the deal within hours. I mean, not even days.
Yeah, I do think that we're really in for it towards the end of the summer and into the fall. I think you and I are going to have a lot of late nights at the Capitol with all of our friends in the press corps. But President Biden wrapped up his trip to Europe overseas and shored up more support for Ukraine. I know that's one of the things that we've been talking about here, but there are concerns about the country's counteroffensive and that it's moving too slowly. Is there anything else that you think we should be doing here?
Not sending mixed messages in Congress about the durability of our support for Ukraine would be a strong start. Rest assured that Vladimir Putin is watching how much GOP House members and Senate members are willing to put the fight against autocracy front and center and support people fighting on the front lines of the free world. I think we should really emphasize just what a success this NATO visit was for President Biden, despite House GOP trying to undermine him. 5 years ago, for example, in Helsinki, Donald Trump prostrated himself in front of Vladimir Putin, put on a performance that his two previous GOP presidential nominees, Romney and McCain, called disgraceful by throwing his own intelligence agencies under the bus in front of the Kremlin. Fast forward 5 years, Joe Biden's in Helsinki again. NATO is stronger than ever. NATO has more unified resolve than ever. Vladimir Putin is weaker than ever. First and foremost, this is about the Ukrainians and their lion-hearted defense of their homeland, but it's also a testament to Joe Biden's statecraft.
But I know that you also look at the Ukraine issue through the lens of China, especially because you're on that select committee. Can you talk a little bit about the way that we've seen the administration doing their outreach to China? I know that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen was there. Of course, the Secretary of State is there as well. Talk about what you're seeing in terms of outreach and how this could play out in terms of the broader U.S.-China relationship.
It's about staying power. The core bet that Xi Jinping makes is that the West, and the United States in particular, is in decline and dysfunction, that a democracy doesn't have the toughness to stay in the Indo-Pacific as a Pacific hegemon for the next century. And our ability to stand up for the rules-based international order in Ukraine translates directly to Xi Jinping's calculations about our willingness to enforce international rules and freedom of navigation in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, and most importantly, along the Taiwan Strait. So what happens with Vladimir Putin affects how Xi Jinping behaves in the crucial next 5 years.
Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts, thanks for waking up with us. And extra points for using the word hegemon before 6 a.m. That's a big one. Up next is